All right, here we are in chapter 19. I'm going to do my recordings this time on my computer, and let's see if this works any better. So basically what we want to talk about in this video is just really what the function of blood is. There we go. And so blood is actually this pretty amazing material, and we're going to go through in this chapter what it's made of and really delve a little deeper into all of these functions. But just to start out, right, in section 19.1 they sort of lay out what is blood for. Now you'll notice they gave you, I think, like 7 different points. You can organize this however you want. So for me, for example, I say, hey, one of the functions of blood is transport. And they actually used transport 3 different times. So I'm going to kind of try to stay with them, right? But really, one of the big roles of blood is to transport. And you say, well, to transport what? So one of the things it's going to transport are gases. So things like CO2 and O2, and we will go into excruciating detail about how red blood cells are actually able to carry those gases. It's also transporting nutrients, right? So we'll find later in this semester that the digestive system has this really rich blood supply, and the whole point, right, is to absorb those nutrients, those lipids, amino acids, carbohydrates, and bring those to the cells. We're also going to carry around some different wastes, different metabolic wastes, things like urea. A lot of these are going to get transported through the bloodstream to the kidney, where they get filtered out in urine. Another thing that they broke down in the book, they say blood transports processed molecules. And I thought that was a really weird way to say it, but I get what they're after, right? So their example of vitamin D is basically that as you look at, say, a metabolic chain of events, it's not necessarily all happening in one place. So their point is, hey, if vitamin D is actually starting at the skin, right? There's cholesterol interacting with sunlight, UV radiation, then that product needs to get carried to the liver, where it gets converted, needs to get carried to the kidney, where it's ultimately converted to vitamin D. So that's their version of processed molecules, and absolutely important. And then, of course, the blood also transports hormones. We were just talking about that in chapter 18. So when they're saying regulatory molecules, absolutely hormones, and then they also mention some enzymes. So you can keep that as 3 separate thoughts in your head as to what is transported, or you could say, hey, transport's super important, and here's what we're transporting, right? Total human construct, it's totally up to you. Okay, another thing that blood is doing is regulation. A big part of this is regulating blood pH. Does anyone know what blood pH should be? If you said 7.4, you're correct. Really, the range is 7.35 to 7.45. This is something that's held very tightly as far as kind of what that set point is. And so one of the things blood does is it's filled with buffers, particularly a lot of the proteins. And if you'll recall, buffers are meant to prevent big changes in pH. So a buffer is willing to either donate a hydrogen if we need to lower the pH, or it's willing to accept a hydrogen if there's too many and we actually need to raise the pH. So that's a really important part of regulation. The other part of regulation, I think they said it really awkwardly by saying we regulate osmosis. And so really that's through ion levels, right? So thinking about, remember, water follows salt. You never actively pump water anywhere. And so in the bloodstream, if we put more salts, ions in the bloodstream, we'll actually pull water out of the cells and into the extracellular fluid, into the blood, and vice versa. And so the composition then of the blood is really important for kind of that shift of fluids as far as osmosis goes. Blood's also important in maintaining body temperature. So the temperature of blood is actually around 100 degrees. And this goes back to some of the things you talked about in Gen Bio. So water has a high, what's the best way to say it? It's really good at avoiding changes, buffering changes in temperature, right? So basically it can absorb a lot of energy if you're getting too hot, and then it can give kind of some of that energy back to the body if the core is cooling off. And water does this because it is a polar molecule. It has hydrogen bonds with its neighbors, and so that's a property that's actually, I wouldn't say unique to water, but water is better at it than any other liquid. And so that's important for us, maintaining body temperature. The blood is also important in defending the body against pathogens. This is really through white blood cells, so things like macrophages or neutrophils going out and finding bacteria and engulfing them. And it would also include antibodies, right? So antibodies are little proteins that B lymphocytes make, and so they're circulating through the blood as well, looking for those foreigners to attack. And then finally, the blood is really important at restricting fluid loss at the site of an injury, blood clotting, right? And so really this is involving platelets, and then also a whole series of proteins, things like fibrinogen are involved in that clotting process. And so blood is really important in doing that. You wouldn't want to, how is this? The fluid loss is a big problem. So if your blood volume, the fluid, is lost, blood pressure goes down, we start having a really hard time delivering oxygen and nutrients to other cells. We go into what would be called hemorrhagic shock. And so the blood system is really cool in this ability to form those clots and stop that loss. Okay, we will be diving into the components of blood next.